Boop. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the release of The Horse Angels. I'm Mark Neihart, the author. And we are here with a bunch of my good friends. Hello, everybody. Sorry you can't see them, but they're a good-looking bunch. We're going to have a reading. Steve, good to see you. We're going to have a reading, and then we're going to have questions and that kind of stuff, and then we're going to have another reading. So there's two readings. I don't want to give away the plot of the book, but so the readings are strategically, placed in there. I want to say one thing. I didn't write this alone, and nothing's done by itself. I've got an incredible bunch of people around me. First and foremost, my wife, Heidi. This wouldn't be a book without her. It really wouldn't. And so, thanks, Heidi. And obviously, editors and proofreaders and people that support. You know who you are, and thank you very much. So, let's talk just a little bit about what the book is about, and then we'll do a reading. Basically, The Horse Angels is a book. It's a book, and it's about a woman named Ann Harper, who is an investigative reporter. And she's doing her investigative reporting just to pay the bills. She's really a passionate horse enthusiast, an ex-equestrian rider or competitor. And she gets sent up to this place called the Angel Ridge Horse Rescue Ranch. And she's up there investigating rumors of a wild horse herd that's being threatened by sinister elements of the cattle industry. And so she gets up there, and she meets a bunch of people that I call the Horse Angels. Rosie and Joe Whitehorse are the owners of the rescue ranch. A brooding cowboy named, what's his name? Nolan Powell. Okay, yeah, Nolan Powell, who has a gnawing secret. A gnawing secret. And anyway, she brings her daughter, her 12-year-old daughter Samantha, with her, and they go and have all kinds of adventures, and it's quite a roller coaster ride, wouldn't you say? The people that's read it? Yeah? Okay. So that's the basic premise of the book. I just want to say, does anybody have any questions right up front? Really? Okay.
I have one.
Okay, Jen.
How did you come up with the logo on the front?
The logo on the front, the thing about the Horse Angels and the book itself, it's a nuts and bolts kind of story. You have a villain and you have a protagonist, but there is a mystical element that runs through it. And the first reading I'm going to do is about the yellow mist, and that's represented by the outside of this ring. And the yellow mist is it's a fictional way to describe the relationship between man and horse. And you'll see as I read it kind of more about that. Inside, you'll see the blue flower, which is a concentrated yellow mist, and it's another level of communication. And that also is in the second reading. You'll see what that's all about. So
let's talk.
Yeah.
Talk about a little bit how it started as a documentary, and it was to serve, kind of to educate the non-horse population of what a role horses took in the development of mankind.
The Horse Angels started out as an idea between Heidi and I. We wanted to make a movie, and we wanted to raise money and make a documentary that described the historical elements and the arc of history between man and horse. And man and horse have had a relationship for 5,000 to 6,000 years, depending on who you talk to. And the cultures that accepted the horse and embraced horse culture were the cultures that moved forward historically. And you can just go back through history. And it's an interesting story. And I wrote this script, and we got it done, and it was just kind of this boring documentary thing that it really was just dry. It's like, 1000 AD, this happened, and a friend of ours said, look, take this story and put a narrative around it, what would you call it, a fictional, and just a drama, right? Write a story. So went through that process, and then the editor got it, Becky Harding, who was a talented woman. She got a hold of it, and that whole documentary part was just dry and boring. So she cut it all out. And then we have the Horse Angels, so that's what that is. And that's kind of how this all started. But the element remains. This is a story about the relationship between man and horse, and that's the main theme of this book. And as CEO of Premier Equestrian, I'm surrounded by horse culture all the time, and that's really an important part of our lives, Heidi and I, and we promote that, the relationship aspect. So I'm going to read a section here. This is the yellow mist, and this is how it's introduced. And what's going on is Samantha and Anne Harper. Samantha's the daughter, Anne's the mother. They're at this ranch. And Anne and Nolan go off to investigate what's going on in the herd, and Samantha is staying at the ranch, and she's with Rosie, who's showing her some cowboy tricks for horse, training. And Samantha, just so you know, is a dressage. She's in dressage training, and she's being trained by her mother. She's not really happy with it, but so she's kind of mystified by the whole Western approach, I guess, natural horsemanship. So this is chapter 6, and this is going to take about 10 minutes. This thing's in the way. This Mark Neihart thing. Hi, everybody. Oh, wow. I could have done that. Can you all hear okay? Is it okay? Samantha stood at the bottom wooden... I'm sorry, I'm going to start again. Samantha stood on the bottom wooden rail of the fence and watched in fascination as Rosie worked the horse in the arena. Sam was fascinated by the fact that the horse, named Vandy, wore no halter, had no lunge line, and was free to move about as he wanted. Rosie held a long stick with a short rope attached at the end and was encouraging Vandy along in low, soothing tones that rang across the quiet of the morning. The sight of this at-liberty work was mesmerizing to Samantha. She had never been around cowboys before. She had always existed in the world of English riding, where the way you looked was equally, if not more important, than the way you rode your horse. The yellow mist had descended upon her mind. It was something that had been with her as far back as she could remember. It always came down on her when she was around horses. She named it the yellow mist because it seemed to swirl around the back of her head, cradling her brain like two large, misty hands. And it was yellow. Not a brilliant, solid yellow, not crayon yellow. It was misty, shimmering, sometimes thick, sometimes wispy, but it had a yellow sheen. Yes, it was definitely yellow. It never frightened her, at least not anymore. It wasn't menacing. It was just something that she noticed whenever she was around horses. The yellow mist could tell her things about horses. She didn't know how, but she could tell what the horses were thinking, or rather, feeling. Actually, she couldn't tell if they were thoughts or feelings. She just could sense certain nuances from the horses that were around her. The horse in the arena in front of her was calm, happy, and secure, but his rear left foot was causing him a little pain. How did she know this? Those communications were so natural to her now, so automatic. She accepted this connection as part of just being alive. Like the effortlessly beating heart, we don't ask why it keeps beating, it just does. Samantha was happy that her mother was gone for the day. Her mother was becoming a problem, a controlling force of unreasonable requests. This unreasonable part of her mother was getting more and more apparent each day. It was very apparent in the way she was trying to train Sam for the Olympic team. Sam was excited when her mother first proposed the idea and got caught up in the heady vainglory of imagining herself in the ring with the best horse in the world, taking first place. Well, she didn't think like that anymore. What changed? It was the yellow mist. Her innate understanding of what horses were feeling, thinking, and experiencing. She could tell her schooling horses were mostly frightened and nervous. She could see her own horse that was lonely and resentful for it. Of course, these horse emotions were not the same as human emotions, but Sam didn't know how to interpret them in any other way other than her human experience. She knew they were different, slower maybe, not as self-centered as human emotions, but emotions just the same. Sam felt this the first time she mounted a horse. Of course, with her parents' occupation, Sam had been on a horse since before she could remember. But the first time she consciously mounted a horse, the first time she took charge, the first time she had will, that was when she noticed it. Something slightly different in her perception, something ever so slight. It took years before she would name it the yellow mist. She ignored it really. For the first years it was no concern to the mind of a growing young girl. Preoccupied with school and friends and horses, she didn't bother with the feeling until one day about 18 months ago. The first time she took notice of her special gift, she was alone in the barn at her mother's farm. It was late at night. She had taken up the habit of sneaking out of the house and giving the horses a midnight snack, maybe an apple, maybe a carrot, a few flakes of hay. The horses were always on a very strict diet dictated by her mother. These clandestine trips were Sam's way of mounting a small rebellion, plus making friends with the horses at the same time. It was their little secret, these midnight visits. Excuse me. Hi. She was alone in the barn. There was a small nightlight that kept the gloom at a minimum and allowed her to move freely around without turning on the main lights. She had entered the barn and the yellow mist descended upon her mind as usual. She didn't really notice, as she was completely unaccustomed to it by now. The horses were nickering and she felt a great joy. They were also getting used to these midnight visits and looking forward to their favorite human handing them a treat. She went from stall to stall handing out carrots she had taken from the house, each horse gratefully accepting the forbidden snack until she got to the horse named William Tell. Peering into the stall, Sam saw the horse near the back of the corner. His head was low and he looked like he was sleeping. The yellow mist jumped and swirled. Still, Sam took no notice. She was trying to coax William Tell to the front of the stall. "Come on, silly," she said in a low voice. "Come and get your carrot." The horse didn't move. "William," she taunted in a sing-song voice, waving the carrot out into the stall. Suddenly, and with a start, she heard a voice. Quickly, she turned around to see who was there, her eyes wide with fear of being caught, knowing her mother would be furious. But she was alone, completely alone. Maybe just a bird, she thought. She turned back to William Tell. The horse was now alert and watching her from the corner of the stall. Again, she heard a voice, a muffled voice. She turned again and looked down the barn alley, but she knew she was alone. The voice continued. It sounded like it was underwater, very remote. She listened intently. The sounds she heard amidst the midnight silence were the other horses crunching their carrots in the soft, steady cadence. There was a little breeze scraping some outside tree against the side of the barn. There was a humming noise coming from the nightlight, and there was a voice. But the voice, it was coming from within her. She was hearing it in her head. That's when she first took real notice of what would later be called the yellow mist. Suddenly the mist grew, enveloping her entire vision, and for a moment, a slight tick of time, it shimmered and exploded into a glimmering firework just in front of her eyes. She felt like she would be swallowed up by it, like she was losing herself. She was confused and frightened. That's when she heard it, a very clear voice coming out of the mist, rising up from her very self. "Help me." She heard it loud and clear. It was William Tell. She looked at the horse in astonishment and saw a bright red glowing light emanating from his gut area, the light pulsating like a dying ember. She dropped the carrot from her hand and ran out of the barn, unsure of what to do. She crept back into the house and went to her room, locked the door, turned on the light, and crawled into bed holding tight to her favorite doll. It was hours before she could will herself to close her eyes. She wanted nothing more than to go into her mother's room and crawl into bed with her, but that was out of the question. She was scared half to death and would have to deal with it on her own. Falling into a troubled sleep, she dreamed of the yellow mist chasing her through dark hallways. The next morning there was a buzz in the house. The barn manager was talking loudly on the house phone. Sam's mother was sitting at the table with a horrid look on her face. Something was wrong. Samantha came down and sat at the table. "William Tell died last night," Anne told her daughter in that abrupt fashion that Sam had grown used to. A vein of terror ran up Samantha's spine. "What? How?" "We don't know, honey. I suspect a twisted gut, but the vet is on the way." Anne noticed the look on her daughter's face. "Are you okay, Sam? You look horrible." Sam burst out into tears. She didn't know what to do. She wanted to tell her mother what had happened, but she didn't feel safe. She got up and ran from the table, heading back to her bedroom. "Sam!" her mother called after her. Anne shook her head. She didn't think Sam was that attached to William Tell. After dealing with the vet, she would go and try to comfort her daughter. First things first. That was almost 2 years ago when Samantha was 10 years old. Over the ensuing months, Samantha had grown to trust the yellow mist. It no longer scared her. She had found no one to talk to about it, and it remained a curiosity. Something that was just there, something that she just liked to test, to challenge. "Samantha," Rosie called from out of the middle of the arena. "Come out here and give me a hand." Samantha smiled and squatted through the fence, running out to where Rosie stood. Vandy stopped and faced the two. Samantha could tell he was curious and not frightened. "Have you lunged a horse before, right?" Rosie asked with a twinkle in her eye. "You bet," said Sam, "but we use a rope." Rosie laughed. Rosie laughed. "Well, sometimes I do too, but today we are working at liberty without a rope." Samantha liked this woman. She could see something wise, trustworthy, and authentic in her. "Okay," said Sam, "but how does it work?" Rosie smiled. "We use the horse's natural communication and instincts, and this stick to communicate and apply pressure from a distance." She handed the stick to Samantha. It was about 4 feet long with a 3-foot rope attached to the end. Sam took the stick and looked at it with curiosity. Holding it upright, she looked at the rope and gave it a quick flick. Vandy's ears perked up. Sam smiled. "Cool," said Sam. "But first let me check something." She handed the stick back to Rosie and slowly walked toward Vandy. Rosie watched as the girl approached the horse confidently, said hello, and then walked back to the back of the horse and lifted up the rear left hoof to inspect it. "There you are," she said gently, and Rosie watched as the girl picked a small stone that had wedged itself between the shoe and the sole. "No more pain," Samantha said to Vandy. "What is it, dear?" Rosie called out. "Oh, just a stone, no big deal," replied Sam. Samantha let the foot down and patted the old horse on the hindquarters. As she walked back to the center ring where Rosie stood, Vandy followed her at a distance. Rosie looked at the girl curiously. She noticed the horse had already attached. "How did you know there was a stone in that hoof?" she asked. "I could just tell," said Sam a bit nervously. She had never talked about her gift to anyone, and astonishingly, no one had ever noticed before. Well, great. Let's get started." Rosie didn't press it. She knew much more than Sam could ever have guessed about her gift, about the yellow mist, and about what it meant. Here, take this stick. She handed the stick back to Sam. Now, what we are doing here is we're trying to gain Vandy's trust. In order to do that, he has to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, he needs a strong leader. You have to be a strong leader. Sam frowned. She understood leadership as being forced and heavy-handed. That was no way to get a horse to trust you. She was confused. Rosie picked up immediately on the girl's confusion. Don't worry, honey, we never force or hurt horses here, ever. Sam wondered how Rosie knew what she was thinking. Rosie continued, you know, horses naturally live in herds, and in the herd there are leaders and followers. All we are trying to do here is get Vandy to understand that you are the leader. That's all. So the first thing you have to do is act like a leader, not a human leader. You have to act like a horse leader. Sam's spirits lifted a bit. She understood this. She knew what horses were thinking and feeling, and she could measure their reactions to what stimulated them. Okay, she said, what do I do? Well, one of the things horse leaders do is push the herd along. They lead from behind, like Obama. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So what I want you to do is to make the horse move. Just walk behind him and wave the stick to get him to move. Then follow him and keep him moving. This will tell him that you are the leader. Sam understood immediately, but something else happened when she went to engage the horse on this level. The yellow mist started to undulate, slowing and softly bouncing as Sam looked at Vandy. Vandy's ears perked up and the horse trotted up and stopped right in front of Sam. His head dropped and Sam wrapped her arms around the head. Oh, you were such a good horsey, she cooed as she stroked the top of the head. Rosie stood there completely amazed. She had seen this before, a very, very long time ago. Laughing out loud, she proclaimed, well, I guess we can skip this part of the lesson. That's the first reading. So,
That's great.
questions?
I have a question.
Yes. Lisa.
Where did you get the concept of the yellow mist? I mean,
And so here's what happened. I've been around high-level horsemen and, you know, what most people would call horse whisperers. And the way they interact with horses really is mystical. You don't understand it. And so when I wanted to write that in the book, I needed a dramatic element or a vehicle to communicate that idea. So I developed the yellow mist to dramatize that innate connection that's some amazing, and there's not very many of them, but I know.
consult with
No,
Walter?
no, I didn't consult with, but you know, Walter Zettel, Pat Pirelli, Brad Anderson. I mean, there's a bunch of guys in my life that I've been.
You saw the interaction.
Yeah, and I was just
You're just trying to put some sort of words to it.
Yeah, and I was observing these guys dealing with horses, and it really is amazing, you know. And I'm by no means at that level, but I needed a dramatic element to communicate that idea. And so, you know, the idea of the horse angels and this yellow mist is kind of a dramatic way to portray what a horse whisperer might do, right? Yeah. Amy, it's good to see you. Anybody else have any comments about the yellow mist? Lori?
Did you spend any time with a young woman, a young female child, to get her feeling about being close to horses?
Neat.
I'm always amazed at the number of young girls who just love horses. I mean, that is I mean, it's seriously a kind of a ubiquitous thing, and it is. I've seen that, and traveling around with Walter, I followed him for 5 years. making the Matter of Trust series. And, you know, he trained everybody from, you know, high-level, you know, Olympians to 10-year-old girls. And no, I didn't spend any time that, you know, that Samantha is probably my inner little girl more than anything. So it's just kind of through observation where I come up with these ideas. Anybody? Really?
Shirley, got any questions?
Well, I don't know if I missed this about the history of the flower. Did somebody ask that?
Well, the history of the blue flower, which we're going to come to next, it's not a history, but the history of the blue flower is really not addressed in the book. The history of the yellow mist is. And in order to dramatize that connection between man and horse, I developed, I would call it a myth, of the first guy that gets up on that first horse, way, you know, 6,000 years ago. And when he does that, it's the horse accepting the submitting to man, and not in a, you know, not in a not in like a lesser role, but as a partner, but you know, accepting man's friendship and forming that initial bond that has carried us over the years and helped us accelerate our cultural advancements. And the yellow mist. So there's kind of this cute little story. The first guy, I call him Zoo. It's you know, the guy's on. It's in the Russian steppes where horse culture started, and Zoo's a weak. You know, he's the third son. He's a little weako. Everybody beats him for sport. You know, he's got nothing going on, and he goes down to the river to get some water, and he's only got a little teeny pail because he can't carry the big one, and all his brothers are out hunting and doing the stuff, and he comes across a horse that's mired in the mud, and it's spring runoff, and this horse is mired in the mud, and through some ingenious ingenuity, it's redundant, but Zoo frees this horse, and this horse you know, is so grateful. This horse is the leader of the herds that surround this tribe, and so he bows down and offers Zoo to ride him. And so Zoo gets on, and he's like riding this horse, and his brothers are like, "Hey, wait, there's little Weekie, what?" You know, and he becomes a great leader, and horse culture spreads from there. And so at that moment, that's when the yellow mist starts. And it starts as a reflection of the sun off of this boulder that Zoo uses to free this horse, and you just have to read the story. But this the reflection on the water is kind of this yellow, you know, reflection, and that's where it starts. So.
And how does the logo tie into all this?
We went through that.
Okay.
So.
We should talk about that. That's the seed of life.
Well, yeah, this was kind of weird. We were, Heidi and I, you know, we were looking for cover art, and that's hard.
Yeah.
It's not like, you know, it's like, oh, hey, what are you going to do? I'll put a picture of a horse on there. It says horse. So I'm going through the internet on Facebook, and I see this thing called the seed of life, and it's sacred geometry. And if you don't know about it, look it up. It's really fascinating in how it works. And the seed of life, you know, I'm like, whoa, that looks like, you know, the blue flower and the yellow mist. And so that's what we used. This is the seed of life, actually. And look it up online. It's just crazy, deep and wide ideas about this geometry and what it means. And so anyway, that's where that came from. And it was just kind of came out of the, you know, out of the ether. So, all right. So the next reading is the blue flower, and that's the kind of the concentrated yellow mist, and it exists in the horse, belongs in the horse herd. And the horse, for reasons I'm not going to go into, this blue flower gets transferred to Nolan Powell. And it belongs in the horse herd. And so Nolan has to get it back to the horse herd. Well, so there's an ancient Indian ceremony. Joe Whitehorse is a Paiute Indian from the tribes in Nevada. And so he knows about this. His grandfather was a medicine man. Joe was trained as a medicine man. So he knows how to do this. And he enlists a couple of his buddies to help him take the yellow mist from Nolan and get it back to the horse.
The blue flower.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Take the blue flower from Nolan and get it back to the horse. And the blue flower, just think of that as concentrated yellow mist. But it's very concentrated, it's very powerful, very special, and Nolan just doesn't have any right to have it, but he was the vehicle that needed to carry it. So the way they do this is they have to have what some people would call a peyote ceremony. Ayahuasca, peyote, I don't actually name the elixir, but the concepts are kind of the same. And so that's what this is. And so they're in a cabin. They all get in a truck and they drive up to a cabin in the mountains of Nevada. They're around this little table. They've got, they're starting the ceremony. The ceremony. Excuse me. In the unseen world of spirit, there are forces that the rational mind cannot under any circumstance perceive. It is at this focal point of the rational mind, the ego, where most of the modern Western culture has built its reality. A reality where things can be measured, looked at, held in hand, materialized, bought, and sold. A reality where life itself is an ever-increasing collection of material experience, where the thoughts of eternity are not entertained until the last dying day when the ego struggles against its certain demise by conjuring up the horror and illusion of finality. Yes, this is where modern Western culture has built its monuments, in the center of the ego. In horse terms, this is the $2 million gelding trained in dressage using the harmful and unrelenting methods of Rollkur to force the horse into a shape that keeps the head down and the test scores up. Where getting the submission of the horse is more important than the animal's well-being, where a test score determines the worth of the individual rider and the value of the horse or its offspring. The ego tends to bifurcate into both creative and destructive forces. The glorious rise of modernity with all the luxuries of clean water, unspoiled food, and 24/7 cable TV would not be possible without ego. Yet our endless wars, constant conflicts, and the sheer brutality of Rollkur is the ego at its dark edges. The duality of man's nature is by far the biggest hindrance to humanity. Yet in the unseen world of spirit, there is no ego. The rational mind does not rule this ether. Check your ego at the door, no rationale allowed. The spirit world lurks just outside of our perceptions, taunting our egos with mystery and the fear of the unknown. The spirit world, with its labyrinth of specialized truths, moves like a deep river, powerful undercurrents affecting our daily lives unbeknownst to the casual observer. Of course, just as deeply within our Western cultured minds, this non-rational truth has been pushed aside in favor of that which can be seen, heard, touched, and spoken of. If it ain't material, it ain't shit, would be an appropriate bumper sticker on the back of an existential redneck's pickup truck. Rationality, ego, remains a stumbling block for the Western mind at the entryway to the spirit world. This stumbling block was the focal point of the ceremony now in progress in the small cabin high up in the mountains of the Nevada range. The yellow mist was part of this non-rational spirit world, but was near enough the border of rationality to be experienced, communicated, shared, and practiced by those who had the gift. However, the blue flower, the Wakani Pohi, as the Nevadans knew it, existed at a much deeper level, less accessible by the rational mind. The whole ceremony was an exercise of getting the rational mind out of the way long enough to access the truth structure of the blue flower, surround it by will of intention, and move it back to the lead stallion in the herd. The rational mind had to be shut off, the stumbling block removed. The non-rational spirit world would be laid bare, unprotected by the strong walls of ego. This was to be accomplished by administering to Nolan a strong cocktail of hallucinogens. There were dangers, however, and precautions had to be taken. The ego, when the ego is anesthetized, how do you say that? Anesthetized, yeah, the doctor knows. When the ego is put down and the non-rational mind exposed, much like an operation on the physical body, there was always a chance of infection, unseen forces entering and taking root like bacteria in the body. The results of a spiritual bacteria can vary in severity, with the worst case being the premature death of the ego, resulting in the incurable madness. The usual precautions would be a period of purification, ridding the body of toxins and stress, and preparing the person for the rigors of exposure to the non-rational. This would be analogous to sterilizing the operating room. In Nolan's case, there wasn't time necessary for the purification rite. This was emergency surgery, no time for clean scalpels. To counter this very real danger, it was decided to provide Nolan with a guide, someone familiar with the spiritual landscape existing just outside the purview of ego, someone to watch over him, help him to complete the task, and bring him back to the safety of the ego intact, stitched up with the precision of a plastic surgeon, leaving little or no psychic scars. This guide, it was decided, would be Lon, who now sat across from Nolan with 2 little cups of black liquid as the ceremony began. As Lon and Nolan drank down the thick, nasty-smelling black liquid, Christo gave the others the first lesson. Do not give in to fear. Focus on the yellow mist, he said. It was plain enough for Joe, Rosie, and Sam, but Anne did not understand. She resisted her desire to ask obvious questions, obvious to her anyhow. Christo told the group he would teach them some simple songs. The singing was designed to occupy the mind, to keep fear at bay. Then they would use their imaginations to keep the yellow mist flowing through the room, surrounding Lon and Nolan to protect them on their journey. This group activity was a very important task to keep Nolan from sliding into the black void from where few men could ever return. Nolan listened to Christo's words and had to admit to more than just a little bit of nervousness. He had experience with the yellow mist. He had guidance early on as he learned to master the ebb and flow. He was skillful in the communication, the interpretation, the transmission of messages to and from the horse world. Yet the blue flower was something completely different. It was much bigger, more potent, more demanding. Nolan did not know how to ride the waves of the blue flower. As he gagged down the thick potion, of black sludge, he knew he was entering an unknown world. He had to trust the yellow mist to bring him back. His whole body shuddered as he forced himself to swallow. It was done. He had taken the first step. The aftertaste of that black goo would stay with him for weeks. Christo stood behind Lon, holding the hoop drum. He struck a low, booming note and started a low chant. Zaw. It was a low, droning sound coming from the bottom of his gut. The vibration of Christo's voice shook the room in a very subtle way. Infinitesimal sound waves began moving the outer edges of each surface in the room, including the bodies seated around the table. Vibrations are the essence of life. To control and guide the vibration is to control and guide life itself. With encouraging arms, Christo guided the others to join him. The yellow mist jumped and skipped and began to join the vibrations. The mind is indeed a curious thing. As Nolan sat at the table, his senses collected the various inputs offered by the surrounding room. Foremost, his eyes gathered up the light. Just before him on the table were 7 candles, arranged in a circle. There, the flames gently danced in the still atmosphere of the room. The candles illuminated the face of the man sitting directly across from him, casting upward shadows from cheekbone to forehead. These shadows made Lon's face appear as a mocking visage, almost sinister. Behind Lon, and dimmer in the candlelight, stood Christo, erect with drum in hand, his brown face almost the color of the wall as the room drew away in the dimness. Next, Nolan's ears were collecting the vibrations of the chanting and the drum beat. Seemingly simple, the sounds were beginning to build upon one another. The different timbre of each voice added a separate layer of vibration that collected in a mounting tower of unison sound. The overtones generated by the bass tones started a subtle ringing in the room, giving a sensation of a circular whirlpool of noise swirling around the center, around Nolan. Added to the sights and sounds was the sense of smell. Nolan's olfactory sensors drew in the different scents, each smell registering a separate memory and impression. Immediately in front of Nolan was a large ceramic bowl filled with sage and purple coneflower. It sent up a fresh, pungent fragrance that was more stinging than soothing. Then came the latent, musty smell of the room itself, dust and dry mold, aging paint gas, and textile fumes. On top of that was the smell of human beings, sweat, body, breath, stale perfume, lotion, and toothpaste. Rolled together, the smell was neither pleasant nor revolting, just the earthy and real sensation of life itself. Nolan's sense of touch was registering the comfortable feel of the light cotton clothing, plus the slight chill of the cold room. As his breath moved in and out of his nostrils, he could sense his nervous system relaxing. He felt his heart beat slow and his blood pressure decrease. His 5th sense, the sense of taste, was completely overwhelmed by the nasty black sludge potion he had just consumed. Alternating between what might be described as the taste of a dirty sock fresh from the foot of a marathon runner and the rotting corpse of a decomposing rodent, the disgusting sensation flooded his tongue, cheeks, throat, and all the way down his esophagus to his stomach, where the potion gurgled, grew warm, and expanded. As Nolan's mind gathered up his senses, his inner voice was busy chatting away in an endless procession of randomly connected thoughts and ideas. Like a stone skipping across a still pond, each thought touched his consciousness with a ripple effect, spreading out to form new ideas and new thoughts. It was an incessant stream of distraction, brought about by the ego in its attempt to keep the dark forces of non-rationality at bay. Accompanying this internal chatter was the constant presence of the yellow mist. It danced around the room in short, staccato movements, ticking by like an oversized wristwatch. Nolan could see this in his mind's eye. The blue flower, on the other hand, had receded into the depths of his presence to a place unknown, hiding out in some attempt of cosmic self-preservation. Nolan attempted to focus on the chanting and on Lon, who seemed to be saying some sort of prayer, the rhythm of which added a stimulating counterpoint to the simplicity of the chant. The more Nolan attempted to focus, the more his mind pulled him away into a stream of relentless chatter. The poison was starting to take effect, moving into his bloodstream, into his nervous system, and up to his neocortex. At first, Nolan didn't notice the rising symptoms. His chattering mind kept up its analytical minutiae, wondering how long the candles would burn, what he'd eaten that day, whether or not he and Anne would ever make love. The distractions kept coming into the quick step pace of his active mind, like high-pressure water from a fire hose. Nolan found his eyelids drooping as he tried to focus his wandering mind. Then there was a stutter in the chatter, an empty space in the stream of randomly connected ideas. It came unnoticed to Nolan's mind and only was evident when he realized the distractions began again. It was a subtle and frightening awareness that his mind had wandered off to somewhere unknown, a blank spot in his life stream. As soon as this occurred to him, he realized that it had happened again. It was like he'd been somewhere else and now he was back, somewhere unknown and unremembered, an Alzheimer moment. It felt like a complete disconnect from the time continuum. His ego was in unfamiliar territory and struggled to maintain control. Nolan looked at Lon and saw sinister shadows spreading further over his face. There was a color shift perception in the dim light, and for a split second, Lon's face flashed purple, then green, then back to normal. Through all this hyper-awareness, the yellow mist was thumping along with the beat of the drum. Christo and the others were chanting softly. Sound began to blend with the light, and Nolan noticed a fascinating development unfolding on the table in front of him. The candle flames were moving in complete synchronization with the chanting and drum beats, one to the right, two to the left, two to the right, one to the left. The flames danced with the sound of the drum, boom, boom, boom. The rhythm was steady and gentle, the foundation of the earth, the rock of reason. It was the anchor to which Nolan tied his evaporating ego. The drum was the only stability in the quickly changing world, the beating heart, the life force, the only thing that was real. Suddenly, a forceful shiver splashed up Nolan's spine. He broke into a sweating hot flash. His nervous system sparkled with energy, and he found himself rocking back and forth, offering an outlet to the excess forces. Nolan watched the table. The candle flames were dancing, but had assumed an even brighter appearance. The shapes were growing. Tiny rays of light splayed out in all directions like mini stars in a circular constellation. The light continued to diffuse until everything in front of Nolan was a blur. He noticed that his eyes were watering profusely, and upon wiping them clear, the light returned to normal. His brain was starting to interpret the input from his corporeal senses with a hallucinogenic twist. The room was vibrating. The sounds of the chanting swirled around. The dim flicker of the candles created more shadows than light. The yellow mist danced along within the crevices of the slowly passing time. Lon kept up his counterpoint prayer. To Nolan, the sound seemed to grow louder and more intense as the flicker of colors upon the images around him drew him in. He found himself staring at the ceramic bowl in front of him, seeing alternate red, blue, green, and deep purples. His neck felt weak, and his head bobbled on his body as it kept rocking to and fro. Then the stutter happened again in Nolan's mind. This time, he was disoriented and wondered where he was. The noise kept pressing into his mind, unrelenting and unruly. A small flame of fear grew up into his consciousness as his ego struggled to find its center of mass. The stutter came once again, and Nolan felt the urge to get up and flee. But when he tried to move, he found his limbs unresponsive, dull and heavy. More fear as the ego felt its loosening grasp on self-control. It was a losing battle. He was on a path that had its own rules, its own motives. Fighting seemed futile. Somewhere in his memory, Nolan drew upon the reason he was here. He had to find the blue flower. The thought calmed him a bit, and he gave his spinning mind a focal point, a goal. The blue flower, Nolan thought. I've got to find the blue flower. His internal voice was loud and overbearing. He focused his eyes on the circle of candles. They had grown into 7 powerful symbols. Each had its own name and cosmic address. They danced together in a seductive and suggestive movement, calling Nolan closer into the flames. He looked and saw a face appear in the middle of the circle, a translucent visage flashing in and out of focus. The face grew clearer as the sounds around him swirled chaotically. The dark black eyes in the face were searching the room, looking here and there. Nolan felt the urge to hide. The scene of the searching eyes scanning the room like a dread beacon sweeping over the whitecaps of an angry dark ocean intimidated Nolan's sense of well-being. Instead of being able to hide, Nolan sat frozen in fear. as the face in the circle finally spotted him. The dark eyes locked onto Nolan's being like a tractor beam. The face, its expression heretofore a blank, emotionless facade, now showed anger as it seemed to recognize Nolan and his special gift. Nolan audibly screamed. Horror gripped his entirety as he felt his chest reflexively tighten. The chanting continued. The sweat poured out. The flaming circle grew larger, and the face, now locked eyes with Nolan, began to chant with the others. There was a different tone to this chant, different words, words as ancient as Zu, words not uttered on the earth since the dawn of language itself. Nolan was now in the full grip of the potion. His mind collapsed upon itself, and his ego was holding its last stand like General Custer at the Little Bighorn. As Nolan was captured by the baleful eyes of the angry face, the 7 candles merged into a circle of light, turning slowly at first, then ever faster, like a spinning hoop of fire. The spinning hoop grew larger and larger and spun faster and faster. Nolan, feeling increasingly smaller and insignificant, finally succumbed. His ego lay down on the battlefield and died with its boots on. The circle opened up like the hungry maw of a whale, and Nolan fell into the dark, swirling emptiness, being swallowed up whole. I can go on.
I love your analogies and metaphors.
Thank you. Thank you. So, needless to say, Nolan does find the blue flower. It does get... Oh, maybe. Maybe he finds it. Any questions at all? Anything? Tim, you have a question.
More of a comment. Or a question. The blue flower, to me, seems like it encapsulates like a library of history depicting the events between man and horse.
That's true.
And something that allows it like a vessel to be carried.
Which actually is in the book in a certain form. And I think you, of all people, have expressed that idea succinctly. Even where I didn't, when you write things, you don't really always know what they mean. And it takes some feedback like that where it's like, oh, yeah, Tim's right. It's,
Might want to repeat what he said in case it didn't pick up.
I
don't know if the microphone picked it up.
Well, Tim was talking about the blue flower and that it meant history, and each petal of the blue flower represents a different epoch in the man-horse relationship. That's what you were talking about, I think.
Right, absolutely. Kind of like a generational vehicle to carry the history forward.
See. Dad, you got anything over there? You all right? Okay. All right, well, guys, thanks for coming to this. This has been really fun for me, and I guess that's it. How do we wrap this up? Thanks, everybody out there in streaming land.
And give a big thanks to Jen.
Oh, thanks to Jen.